Welcome back, guys. We're breaking down UFC 279, Chimaev versus Diaz, and I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of this card. We have Diaz and Ferguson fighting on the same card, and they're not fighting against each other. It definitely feels like a bit of a cash grab sort of card anyways, but I feel like they kind of dropped the ball with the matchmaking here. I feel like Diaz-Ferguson would have been a fantastic matchup, but instead we're getting them matched up against two younger guys. Good chance we see a couple of legends get brutalized. Just really unfortunate matchmaking, in my opinion. Big missed opportunity. I feel like, I really do feel that Diaz versus Ferguson would have been, just a great fan matchup and just would have been a lot more compelling than what we have on our hands here. And then maybe look to feed Masvidal to Chimaev. I feel that probably do a lot more pay-per-views, but it seems the UFC's pretty intent on kind of doing these guys dirty. But yeah, that's the rant I have for this card. We have 13 fights so far, so let's get right into the breakdowns. And moving along, we have Yohan Lainesse versus Darian Weeks, and Weeks is the plus 135 favorite, or minus 135 favorite. Lainesse is the plus 115 underdog. And we'll take a look at him first. So Lainesse, he's a pretty heavy-handed boxer, someone who likes to plod forward and just throw big power shots. That said, though, he does seem to load up pretty big on his shots. They're somewhat telegraphed, and against better strikers, they're probably going to be able to see some of those shots coming. But against lower-level guys, he's been able to kind of get away with it. And the other thing with Lainesse is it does seem like his cardio is a little subpar. Kind of hard to really tell because he's got a number of finishes later in fights. I've seen him wrestle as well, but in terms of just the body language, it doesn't really look great after the 3-minute mark or so. He's usually huffing and puffing in there. The movement seems pretty labored. But again, like I said before, it does look like he's been able to push through it in a number of his fights. But it is worth noting that it is against some pretty low-level guys, so there probably hasn't been too many guys that have been able to really take advantage of it. The last guy that was able to do it was Gabe Green, who I think is a pretty respectable fighter, was able to put a bit of pace on Lainesse, really dig to the body, and eventually get Lainesse out of there. But again, I do think Green is a pretty solid fighter, a guy who's had some UFC experience and had decent regional experience also. But in this matchup, Lainesse is going to be going up against Weeks, who I think is still pretty green. Weeks, he does have a pretty extensive amateur career, but at the end of the day, it is amateurs we're talking about, and it's not like he's just going out there and blowing guys out of the water either. He's got a number of amateur losses, which are a little questionable also, but as far as what Weeks brings to the table, I think he's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter. I believe he does have a wrestling base, but his striking is okay. He does seem to have a little power. A bit rudimentary, though. He's throwing a lot of the same stuff over and over, but he's got pretty good wrestling. I think he's got decent top control, and he's somewhat strong in the clinch. Cardio seems to check out, and his durability seems okay also. Kind of hard to say because I don't think he's fought a ton of heavy hitters. He did fight Barberena, but Barberena is more of like a volume attritional guy, and Gary has shown some power on the regional scenes, but has taken a much more point fighting approach at the UFC level. But taking a look at this matchup, it is a little tough to call because I think that both fighters are still pretty unproven. Both guys, I think, are still kind of green in their career. And honestly, I don't think either guy's really faced anyone quite like each other either. So stylistically, this is kind of a tough fight to call. But, I am leaning the weak side just purely based on the cardio and the potential wrestling upside. Lainesse, he is pretty dangerous early. I don't think Weeks has quite faced someone with the power and physicality that Lainesse brings to the table, but if Lainesse isn't able to get Weeks out of there, I do think that we see Weeks maybe start to pull ahead in the second and third round, really mix in the wrestling as Lainesse starts to slow down. But the big concern that I guess I really have on the Weeks side is that I don't think his striking's all that good, and I don't think he's really all that dangerous on the feet. So I don't know if Lainesse is going to really respect the power of Weeks. So I suspect Weeks is really going to have to get his wrestling going to have success in this fight, which I think is possible. He probably will struggle a little bit early when Lainesse is fresh. I do think that Lainesse is going to be the stronger, more physical guy. So it might be hard, taking him down and controlling him early in the fight. And if Lainesse is able to land some big, heavy shots early in the fight, I think it may deter Weeks from being able to do too much come that second round also. So I can definitely see a scenario where Lainesse, he's able to do enough in the first 2 rounds to win those by, a narrow-ish margin. And Weeks, I don't think he's got a lot of finishing upside unless Lainesse just completely gasses out. But, beyond that, I don't know if Weeks has a ton of finishing power. I don't know if he's a big submission threat either. So, this is a pretty iffy fight in my opinion. But if I had to take a side here, I think I'd go with Weeks. I think that I just like his cardio and the wrestling advantage that he should have in this fight. I feel like it's a pretty solid recipe for success, especially at the lower levels here. So I'm going to go with Weeks here. I'm not extremely confident, but I do think Weeks gets it done by 29-28 decision. And moving along, we have Melissa Martinez versus Elise Reed. And Martinez is the minus 155 favorite. Reed is the plus 135 underdog. And we'll start with Martinez first, who is making her UFC debut. She does seem to primarily be a striker. Lots of movement on the feet. Does seem pretty quick also. She does seem to throw with heat, and the cardio looks like it checks out. But where she's really seemed to struggle is in the grappling. I've seen in fights that she struggled the most have been when her opponents are either controlling her against the cage or when they're taking her down. But on the feet, she's been able to largely style on most of her opponents. But she's going up against Reed, who has had a few fights at the UFC level already. I think she's a somewhat technical boxer. The striking is a bit more fundamentally sound, a little plotty with her footwork, but Reed does seem to throw with a bit of power, especially when she's sitting down on some of her shots. But with Reed, she has historically struggled on the ground as well. So both fighters, I think in this matchup, is going to get the fight they want here. It should be a striking affair, which I do expect to be pretty competitive. I don't have a particularly strong opinion in this fight. It's kind of hard to really gauge where Martinez is at this stage in her career. She's making her UFC debut. Her striking has looked pretty solid, on the regional scene, but she's going to be getting that step up in competition here. She's not going to be fighting, these lower level women on the regionals. And, I don't expect her to look as good as she has coming into the UFC. But, stylistically, I think that Martinez is going to be much different from, Reed's UFC level opponents. Reed has largely fought grapplers since coming to the UFC, made her debut against Eubanks, got mauled, ended up getting finished, I think, in the second round or first, I don't remember. But her second fight was against McKenna, another grappler who, Reed did show, some pretty good takedown defense and get-ups in that fight, was able to keep it standing long enough to win a decision there. And then her last and most recent fight was against Sam Hughes, who is more of a pressure wrestler, was able to really put a pace on Reed and get her out of there in that third round. So Martinez, she's going to come in and strike with Reed. And Reed technically does have more UFC experience, but like I was saying before, it's been largely against grapplers, so I don't know how much of that is going to translate here against Martinez. But as far as an official pick, I think I'm going to lean Martinez here. I think it's a pretty 50-50 fight, honestly, but I think what it'll potentially come down to is maybe just the optics of it. I think Martinez might just be the more aggressive fighter. I think she's going to be the one moving forward more. I think she's going to be thrown a little more volume as well. And on top of that, I think she might just be a little quicker also. So, for all those reasons, I think that Martinez slightly edges it, but, I really wouldn't hate anyone taking a shot on Reed here. And, I might take a small poke on Reed by decision just because, this is a step up in competition for Martinez. And we have seen time and time again when these fighters who have looked solid on the regionals come up and they fight someone who's a little more proven at the UFC level, they tend to struggle a little bit. They don't look quite as good as they did, against regional level opponents. But on the other hand, we have Reed, who I honestly don't rate all that highly either. She's still pretty green herself. In terms of her striking, the only time she's looked kind of good was against McKenna on the feet, and McKenna's a grappler with just no reach whatsoever. So, I don't know if you could really take too much stock in that performance. So, I'm just going to go with Martinez in this fight. I think she gets it done with the volume and the output. It's going to be, I think, a pretty competitive fight, but I'm going to go with the younger and potentially quicker fighter in Martinez. So give me Martinez by decision. And in the next fight, we have Chad Anheliger versus Heili Alateng. And Alateng is the minus 165 favorite. Anheliger is the plus 140 underdog, and we'll start with the underdog and in Anheliger first. So with Anheliger, he does seem like a somewhat well-rounded fighter. Can do a bit of everything. Striking is solid. Seems to have a little power in his hands. Lots of finishes, but has been able to go to a decision and win decisions. He has shown he could wrestle and grapple a little bit. Cardio seems decent, and durability seems okay also. So just overall, I think a pretty solid fighter. The concerns with him, though, is one, he is a bit up there in age, especially at bantamweight. He's 35 years old, so getting a little old there. Two, he's got some serious T-Rex arms going on there, so he's going to be giving up a lot of reach in most of his fights. And lastly, the takedown defense is just not good from Anheliger. He does a decent job of working his way back up, but it's just not a great look, getting repeatedly taken down. I think under the UFC promotion, he's given up 7 or 8 takedowns over the course of 2 fights. One of them actually ended, I think, in the second round also. So, had that fight had gone the distance, he might have given up even more takedowns. So I think that's just a massive liability in his game, and I do think it's something that can be taken advantage of here. He's going up against Heili Alateng, who is a somewhat well-rounded fighter, more of a counterpuncher on the feet, very, very low volume, but he does have some wrestling in his back pocket that we have seen him go to. That said, Alateng's just not very reliable to go there. When he has gone to it, it's been really late in fights. Against Bakkarel, it didn't happen until, I think, the third round, and same with the Benoit fight also. In some fights, he just doesn't go to it at all, and he ended up losing those fights. So I feel like that's the path for Alateng to win here, but he's just not really reliable to go there. So I don't know if I could really bank on him aggressively attacking the wrestling. And on the feet, I do think it's pretty competitive. I might actually even favor Anheliger. I do think Alateng might have the power advantage, but Anheliger might be a bit quicker. He's a little more reliable to throw volume. Anheliger's got a pretty awkward style. Hard to get a great read on, but he does seem to throw with a bit of power. And again, he does like to sometimes blitz in, which I did see Alateng struggle a little bit with against Lopez late in the fight. Lopez was starting to kind of just crash the pocket and blitz in on him, and Alateng looked a little lost in there when when Lopez was doing that. And the Anheliger is someone who will look to do that occasionally. And Alateng also struggled a little bit being held against the cage, which Anheliger has shown he could do also. So I feel like this is a pretty competitive fight here. I will say this, though. Alateng, he does have more UFC experience. He is a little more proven at this level. I don't think Anheliger has really beaten anyone of note. His one win in the UFC was over Jesse Strader, who, might have an all-time bad chin for the division. And his win against Gafarov on the Contender Series wasn't even that impressive. It was a split decision win. He gave up a ton of takedowns, a ton of control time. It was honestly a fight that Gafarov probably should have won as well. So I don't think his wins have been particularly great. He's been fighting very low-level guys, whereas with Alateng, at least he's been in there with some, UFC-level guys or guys that have had a few UFC-level fights, right? I don't really rate Alateng all that highly either, but, he has been in the UFC a little longer. And Alateng, I do think, is going to be the more physical guy as well, so I feel like if he's going for the takedowns, he will have some success there. But again, I just can't really trust him to do that. But as far as a pick, I do have to kind of lean Alateng. I think there's a very clear path here. He's going to be the more proven guy. He's probably the better athlete also, but, I don't know if I could really get to the minus 165, minus 170 here on him. I think that if anything, Anheliger might be the side from a betting perspective. I think that Anheliger can make this very competitive on the feet, and I think he can mix it up enough that he'll be able to win some minutes also. But ultimately, I got to go with Alateng here. I feel like there's just way too clear of a path to victory here. I think that, with some proper timing in his takedowns, he could probably just end up, being able to get enough control time for 2 or 3 minutes in 2 of the rounds and be able to win rounds that way. You can't really trust him to do it, but I feel like it's just way too clear of a path to victory for me to pick against it. So I'm going to go with Alateng by decision. I think he could land some big shots and then likely seal the deal with a couple takedowns. So give me Alateng here. Alateng to win by decision. And in the next fight, we have Danyelle Wolf versus Norma Dumont. And Dumont's the minus 330 favorite. Wolf is the plus 270 underdog, and we'll start with the big underdog in Wolf and also the UFC newcomer. So with Wolf, she is a boxer, right? She does have a pretty extensive boxing background. The issue is she is getting a little up there in age. She's 38 years old, has only had one MMA fight, and that was a Contender Series fight, so really don't know how much you could take from that. But from what I have seen, obviously she's got good boxing for the division, relative to the division. I like that she doubles up on the jab. She's got a nice 1-2, is able to put combinations together. Does seem to have a bit of zip in her shots also, and she's actually pretty big for the division. There's not a lot of, I'd say, natural 145ers in this division. Dumont isn't small or anything, but she is going to be, I'd say, a little more squat and stout compared to Wolf, who I think has got a much more natural frame for this division. But I guess speaking of Dumont, Dumont is a pretty well-rounded fighter. I've liked what I've seen from her on the feet. I don't think she's a phenomenal striker or anything, but she does seem pretty aggressive there. I've seen her put together 3-4 punch combinations. She does throw with a bit of heat also. And with Dumont, I've seen her mixing the grappling also, right? She's, cage pushed a little bit in some of her fights. She's got a decent body lock takedown. And on top, she's pretty heavy there. She will look for submissions. She will go for the ground and pound. I've seen her overextend a little bit in some of her fights before, but as far as this fight goes, she should have a pretty pronounced edge in terms of the wrestling and the grappling here. Obviously, I do favor Wolf on the feet, but very limited footage in terms of MMA. Even in her fight in the Contender Series, it looked like her opponent was having a bit of success when she was moving forward and throwing heat and pressuring Wolf. So while I do think that Wolf should have the advantage on the feet, I don't think she's some elite level boxer or anything. But yeah, as far as this fight goes, I think there's going to be a very clear path to victory here for Dumont. But I guess the question is if Dumont is going to take that path of least resistance. We saw in her most recent fight against Chiasson where, in theory, she should have had the grappling success here. She was going up against a Chiasson who has struggled in the clinch, who has struggled off her back, and Chiasson, she has had some cardio issues as well, but Dumont went in there and just looked to strike with Chiasson and didn't really push the grappling until it was a little too late, and she ended up giving up takedowns of her own as well and ended up ultimately losing that fight. So I do think the fight IQ is not all there for Dumont. I can't really trust her to necessarily fight optimally, and if she's just going to look to stand and strike with Wolf, I can definitely see Dumont dropping a couple rounds, maybe even getting knocked out. She did get knocked out by Megan Anderson, and if Megan Anderson's able to knock her out, I think someone like Wolf is going to be capable of doing so as well. But at the end of the day, I still have to pick Dumont here, because on the other side of things, we have Wolf, who is a 38-year-old boxer with very, very limited MMA experience. She did defend takedowns in her Contender Series fight, but that was against a pretty low-level fighter. I think that Dumont should be levels above Tennant in terms of the wrestling and the grappling. And, Wolf did have some questionable decision-making in that fight also. I think she jumped guillotine late in that early in that third round and ended up spending most of that round on her back. And that's definitely something that you don't want to be doing in this matchup here. So, I got to go with Dumont here, but no way am I going to bet her or parlay or anything. I don't think Dumont is a reliable enough fighter to be laying, minus 380, minus 400 almost. So, I'm going to pick Dumont to win. Dumont to win by decision, but I wouldn't be entirely surprised if Dumont was able to find the finish, because in theory, there should be a pretty big gap in terms of the grappling between the two, and if Dumont is aggressively attacking the grappling, she could potentially find a submission or even a ground and pound finish. Dumont isn't really a finisher in my opinion, but I do think that there could be big enough holes in the defensive grappling of Wolf for Dumont to potentially capitalize on. So I think Dumont inside the distance is live. I think Dumont by decision is live also. So I'll pick Dumont to win, but again, I don't really trust her at this current price. And in the next fight, we have a pretty low-level heavyweight fight between Chris Barnett and Jake Collier. I'll keep this one short because I do think it's a pretty straightforward breakdown. Barnett, bit of a meme at this point. The guy is a fan favorite, right? I mean, who doesn't love a fat guy just doing backflips and spinning wheel kicks? But as far as what he brings to the octagon, I think he's a pretty limited fighter. He is pretty explosive and definitely is a decent athlete for his size. He's got somewhat quick hands and does seem to throw with a bit of power, but a lot of his knockouts have been on the regionals against lower level guys. And his cardio, I think, in defensive grappling are pretty subpar. He slows down in fights, and especially at heavyweight, he's going to be giving up a ton of size, and it's just going to be naturally hard for him to really get off the cage or get off his back if he is taken down by other more legit heavyweights. But fortunately for him, Collier, pretty bloated up heavyweight himself, and is more of a striker. Collier, he's a volume striker for sure, especially at heavyweight. He moves pretty well in there. It does put combinations together pretty well. I like that he caps off a lot of his combinations with kicks. The cardio seems to be decent, and he is capable of mixing in the grappling also, right? Got that early submission against Sherman and was also able to hit a few takedowns on Arlovsky and get a bit of control time. Ended up being a very close fight. A lot of people thought he won, but I do think it was a pretty close fight. Can't argue with the results too much. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that Collier is the rightful favorite here. I think that he's likely going to be the one winning minutes. I think he's more reliable to throw volume also. I think his cardio's a bit better. I think he's a little more well-rounded. Barnett, hasn't really looked good at the UFC level so far. I know he did get that spinning wheel kick against Jean Vellante, but up until that point, I'd say that Vellante was actually winning minutes over Barnett. It didn't look like Barnett really was doing too much. I mean, he was getting off on a few leg kicks, but it looked like he was struggling closing the distance against Jean Vellante of all people. And, was fortunate for him to pull off that spinning wheel kick. But, had that fight gone to a decision, I think he likely would have lost that fight. Whereas with Collier, he has been in there with some respectable guys. He has beaten some respectable guys since coming back. Well, you know what? I take that back. He's gotten wins over Jean Vellante and Chase Sherman. Not that respectable, but, he did fight pretty competitively with Felipe and Arlovsky, who, Arlovsky is a veteran, but at this stage in his career, I think Arlovsky's not going to be getting too many wins over, better guys. A lot of his wins have been over, the lower rung of the heavyweights, but I still rate the performances of Collier much higher than the performances of Barnett lately. So overall, I do favor Collier a bit more in the spot. Collier is actually going to be the taller, longer guy as well. And again, we did see Barnett kind of struggle, getting in on Vellante, kind of struggled against Vellante at distance. And Collier, he will have the length and the height advantage. That said, though, Collier is someone who does tend to kind of just crash the pocket and, be aggressive, get in your face. So, I don't know if that's something that Barnett will really struggle with here. One thing Vellante had a ton of success doing was just throwing teeps to the body, and that's something that I feel like Collier could potentially do here. I think with proper game planning, he'll have a lot of success just going to the body of Barnett, which I think is something that's super underutilized at the heavyweight division. Most heavyweights are just bloated up light heavyweights, and in this case, bloated up middleweights. But yeah, I think the body's just going to be a super easy target. It's going to be relatively safe throwing kicks and teeps to the body. I think it'll do a great job of, if you do that enough, you can set up the head kick, and also it'll just slow down guys because most heavyweights have pretty shit cardio to begin with. So I think going to the body is going to be a great thing for Collier to do. He hasn't really done it too much at the heavyweight level, but I think that, if he did his homework, this is going to be a very easy path for him, a very easy thing for him to do to just mix into his game. So I'm going to go with Collier in this spot. The line does seem a little wide, especially since Collier is someone who tends to force the action. He tends to get into these dogfights. Even against Arlovsky and Felipe, those were very competitive fights, just because Collier, while he does throw volume, he does leave his chin on a platter a little bit, and it does leave him open to getting hit also, and it does lead to fights being a bit closer than they should be. And while Barnett hasn't looked that great, he isn't going to be giving up a ton of size here, and I do think that Barnett does throw with a bit of power. I think that when Collier is going to be crashing the pocket, he's going to leave openings for Barnett to land some stuff too. So overall, I do favor Collier. At the end of the day, he is, I think, the more well-rounded fighter. He's had actually more UFC experience, even before he made his move up to heavyweight. And at heavyweight, I do rate his performances a bit more. He's the more well-rounded guy. So for all those reasons, I do have to favor Collier here, but at minus 360, I think it's getting a little ridiculous here. I'm kind of leaning Collier by decision, so, might want to shorten the odds with that, just because I don't think Collier's got a lot of finishing upside at the heavyweight division, unless Barnett just completely gasses out or something. I don't really see Collier being able to pull off the finish here. So I'm going to go with Collier by decision. And in the next fight, we have Jamie Pickett versus Denis Tiuliulin. And Pickett's the minus 135 favorite. Tiuliulin's the plus 115 underdog. And this fight was a rebooked fight. They were initially scheduled to fight a little earlier this year. I don't know what happened there, but it looks like they're looking to rebook it here for this event. But we'll start with Tiuliulin first, who is, I'd say, a pretty heavy-handed striker. Lots of early finishes in his career and on the regionals. But from what I have seen, Tiuliulin does really struggle off his back. I think he's got a very bad ground game. There was a fight where he was taken down and his opponent was landing some decent ground and pound on him, but Tiuliulin wasn't really doing anything to get up. He was just looking at the ref, kind of hoping the ref would, separate them, even though his opponent was throwing ground and pound. I think Tiuliulin's got pretty bad takedown defense, pretty poor get-ups, and, he's a bit of a gasser himself. He does seem like he could be dangerous early, but beyond that, I really don't think Tiuliulin's a very good fighter. But on the other side, we have Pickett, who I don't really rate much either. I think that Pickett's a pretty unreliable fighter. He seems to have a lot of the tools to succeed, but I just don't think he's very skilled or very athletic either. He definitely seems big and athletic, but, I feel like he gets bullied a lot in the clinch and in the grappling exchanges. We saw Staropoli, a much smaller guy, kind of just control him against the cage for extended periods. Daukaus, he is a good grappler, but he was able to kind of just manhandle Pickett in a lot of the grappling exchanges. Even Holmes had a bit of success there. And, Pickett, he fought very closely with Holmes, who was, I think, debuting and on relative short notice as well. Pickett, he also does seem to slow down. He fights through the fatigue, but I don't think the cardio is great either on his side. Pickett doesn't seem to have a ton of power either. So overall, I'm just not very high on Pickett. But between the two, I do think that he's going to be the more well-rounded fighter. But overall, I do think this is a pretty low-level fight. Kind of a tough one. On one hand, we have Tiuliulin, who I think is, again, pretty low-level. He's got a very bloated record, which, isn't even saying much because the guy's 10-6. So, he's got a somewhat padded record in terms of, his wins. And he's very one-dimensional. Pickett, on the other hand, I think is pretty low level, but I do think he's going to be the more well-rounded guy. He's got more UFC experience, and I think he might actually have the slightly better cardio. So, for those reasons, I kind of edge Pickett a little bit here. Tiuliulin, he's the heavier hitter. He could maybe get the early finish, but Pickett has shown pretty good durability overall. It took, I think, like 12 elbows to the side of the head for Jordan Wright to finish him. So, as far as a pick, I think I'm going to go with Pickett here. I think that he's going to be able to survive the early onslaught of Tiuliulin and eventually take over. I think that while Pickett he isn't the best fighter, he has been able to dispose of some of these low-level guys, these guys like Tiuliulin. So, I think he can get it done here. I think that Tiuliulin honestly kind of gives me some fraudulent vibes. I think if Tiuliulin isn't able to get that early finish, we see Pickett start to maybe volume him up in that second and third round. Maybe be able to mix in some of the wrestling and the grappling and win, I think, a pretty greasy fight here. So give me Pickett. I think Pickett likely gets it done by decision. Maybe a late finish. Pickett hasn't really shown a ton of finishing instinct, but with how badly Tiuliulin gasses and how poor he looks off his back, I wouldn't be entirely surprised here. But official pick, I'll go with Pickett by decision. And moving along, we have Jailton Almeida versus Anton Turkalj. And Almeida's the minus 900 favorite. Anton's the plus 550 underdog. And this is going to be a short notice catchweight fight for some reason. Almeida was supposed to go up against Abdurakhimov, but Abdurakhimov pulled out. And Anton is stepping in. Again, not sure why it's a catchweight fight. At 220, could have just made it a heavyweight fight. Wouldn't have really mattered too much, but we'll start with Almeida, I guess, the guy who's in a full camp, big favorite here, and rightfully so. I mean, we kind of know the deal with Almeida. The guy's a very aggressive, very strong grappler, very explosive with his takedowns, very good timing on the level change. We'll look to chain wrestle, and on top, he's very aggressive with the ground and pound and the submission attempts. Has been able to finish all of his wins. Very impressive. Does raise some concerns in regards to how he's going to look later in fights, if the cardio is going to hold up. Not sure if it's going to be too big of an issue here. From what I've seen from this Anton guy, he looks to grapple in a lot of his fights also, kind of just punch his way into the clinch, get on top of opponents, either hold him against the cage or take him down and just really put a grappling pace on him. Anton, he's been able to finish most of his fights also. Did have his Contender Series fight go the distance, was able to really just hang off of his opponents for the remainder, or for most of the fight, but honestly not super impressed. Taking a look at this matchup, I think Almeida is very clearly the side here. I think he is going to be the better grappler. He's going to be the better athlete also, and he's going to have the full camp. So yeah, I mean, pretty straightforward here. I think Almeida is going to be able to get the takedowns and likely find the submission early in the fight. I don't know if Anton's takedown defense and submission defense is going to hold up against a much stronger and higher level grappler in Almeida. I honestly just think that Almeida can probably just outmuscle Anton in a lot of the exchanges and be able to just force his way into a submission here. So official pick is going to be Almeida by round 1 submission. Obviously, there are the concerns of how he's going to look if he isn't able to pull off that submission, if his cardio is going to hold up. So for those reasons, I don't think you could really play him at minus 900, really. Especially since most of his win condition is tied up in the early rounds. But I do think he likely gets it done here. I don't think Anton is really anything special. He might get some wins in the future, just because I do think the grappling is, good enough to maybe pull off some low-level wins. But I don't know if he's going to be able to do it against Almeida here. I think Almeida's just better grappler, better athlete, more experience. So yeah, I'm going to go with Almeida here. Round 1 submission. And in the next fight, we have Hakeem Dawodu versus Julian Erosa. And Dawodu's the minus 220 favorite. Erosa is the plus 185 underdog. And we'll start with Erosa, a very fun fighter to watch, in my opinion. An all-action fighter. Never been in a boring fight. But with Erosa, he is very pressure-heavy in his striking. Very big for the division, but doesn't use it particularly well. He's someone who's going to look to just get in your face, exchange in the pocket. Not a ton of power, but he does pack a lot of volume, and is someone that will look to just overwhelm you as the fight progresses, because he does do a really good job of, being attritional, doing attritional work like, attacking the body. He'll switch stances in there just to go for those body kicks, and he does rip to the body as well. So I do like that he does that, right? He's been able to cook guys with, I'd say, pretty solid cardio in Woodson and Jordan. 2 guys he's been able to kind of just get out of there in the 3rd round. Been able to just outpace him. Erosa has shown he can mix in the wrestling also, and a bit of grappling. But obviously the big knock on Erosa is going to be the chin. He's been knocked out multiple times. He's been hurt and dropped on a number of occasions also. But beyond that, I think Erosa is actually a pretty solid fighter who's actually been fighting for quite a while now, too. So I think he's a pretty proven fighter. You kind of know what you're getting with Erosa. And on the other hand, we have Dawodu, who's a very technical Muay Thai striker, very good shot selection, very heavy leg kicks, decent power. But the issue with Dawodu is, he can be one and done with the shots, not a ton of volume. And, Dawodu overall is a pretty interesting fighter in that I feel like he does seem to have some power, but I don't know if I'd actually consider him a power guy. I mean, he's stung guys before, and they do seem to respect his striking, but he's actually only gotten 1 knockout at the UFC level, and that was from a head kick. So, I don't know if this guy's got a ton of power in his hands. Not saying he's pillow-fisted at all, right? But, I don't think he's like a massive hitter. That said, he is going up against Erosa, and I guess against Erosa, anyone's liable to just get a knockout against him. So I think it's a pretty interesting stylistic matchup. I don't think Dawodu's quite faced someone with the pressure-heavy style that Erosa brings. Dawodu, he has fought some wrestlers and such, but a lot of the strikers he's gone up against are, I'd say, a little more traditional in their style. Guys like Arce and even Takugov, and some of the low-level guys like Arnett and Bokniak. These guys, I think, are a little more, I guess, traditional in their striking approach, whereas with Erosa, he's just going to get in your face. He's going to spam volume. He's going to take shots, but Erosa overall is just very reliable to just throw, right? And that's what makes this matchup so interesting, in my opinion. It'll be interesting to see how Dawodu responds, but I do think that Dawodu's going to look to stand his ground here. I think Dawodu actually does a decent job of holding center. I feel he'll sit down on a few shots and really get the respect of Erosa. But again, I can't be 100% confident because Erosa, I think, is a pretty unique matchup for him. But I do see Dawodu just landing some big shots and really deterring Erosa from just overwhelming him. But, if he isn't able to do that, if Erosa is able to start to just, move forward on him and just start to, take those shots and continue to throw heavy, I think that we could see a pretty interesting fight, going into the second and third rounds. Dawodu historically hasn't fought in a ton of very high-paced fights. The most he's ever thrown was against Trezano in his most recent fight. But, before that, he's actually been in somewhat low-paced affairs. And Erosa is going to look to push the action here. And if Erosa doesn't get knocked out in that first round or so, I think that things could get very, very interesting. I don't know how how Dawodu is going to hold up, when he is in an extended firefights. Like, if for some reason Dawodu isn't able to completely suppress some of the pressure and the pace of Erosa, there is a possibility that maybe Dawodu starts to melt under the pressure, in that second and third round. But ultimately, I do think that Dawodu is going to be able to get the respect of Erosa. Erosa is just a little too wild and reckless in there. I think that Dawodu is going to be able to land something big and either knock Erosa out, or at least make him respect him enough that Erosa is not just going to be able to go in there and spam volume with impunity. And one more thing I do want to add is Erosa, while he does have decent cardio and he is able to push a pretty solid pace, he does keep his hands down pretty much all the time. And especially as the fight progresses, Erosa gets even more lax with his defensive tendencies. I feel like with just the volume he's turning out, he gets a little slower. He gets a little more hittable. And, he has been timed with that head kick before, just because he keeps his hands down a lot. And sometimes he'll dip into it. And again, he does get a little, he does slow down, right? He almost got head kicked by Steven Peterson of all people. And, Steven Peterson was able to put him on skates for a little bit. So I do feel that Dawodu can definitely do the same. I think Dawodu's got a lot more power than Steven Peterson. And at this stage in his career, I don't think Erosa's durability is getting any better. So official prediction, I'm going to go with Dawodu by round 2 knockout. I think Dawodu's actually able to land a head kick here. Dawodu has actually landed that head kick before. And against Erosa, for all the reasons I've stated above, I think it's going to leave openings for Dawodu to land something big. So I got to go with Dawodu in this spot. I think he gets the knockout. And even if he isn't able to get the knockout, I feel like he'll have enough big moments where, he's either hurting Erosa or wobbling him enough that he'll be able to win rounds pretty clearly that way. So I'm going to go with Dawodu by round 2 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Johnny Walker versus Ion Cutelaba. And Cutelaba is the minus 180 favorite. Walker is the plus 155 underdog. And we'll start with Johnny Walker first. Decent underdog coming into this fight. And Walker, he is a pretty high-paced fighter, pretty high-octane, really explosive with his strikes. He likes to throw spinning attacks, jump knees, just very, low-percentage moves. He did have that one fight with Santos where it ended up being a very low-paced fight where Walker was kind of content to just, point fight in that fight. But beyond that, he's actually shown that he is largely a killer-be-killed fighter. And, of course, you can't talk about Johnny Walker without mentioning the chin issues of Johnny Walker. He's been knocked out. He's been rocked on multiple occasions. He's been finished, on the regionals. He's been finished at the UFC level. So the chin is a massive liability here. And while I don't think that Cutelaba is a very high-level striker or anything, Cutelaba is, he does have some power in his hands, and I do think that if he could clip Walker with something, he could hurt Walker pretty badly, maybe even put him out. So that's definitely on the table here. But as far as what Cutelaba actually brings to the table and what he does well, though, is going to be his wrestling. He does his best work when he is able to hit takedowns and either maul opponents on the ground or just look to kind of spam takedowns in there. But with Cutelaba, he is actually more of a finisher than he is someone that goes to a decision. He has had multiple fights go to a decision, but a lot of the time he is able to kind of pound guys out there earlier in fights. That said, when fights do go to a decision with Cutelaba, he generally does tend to fall off a bit, just because he does seem to put a lot of strength and explosiveness in the early takedowns, and he does throw heavy early also, so it does lead to him kind of tapering off as the fight starts to progress. But Cutelaba, he is dangerous early, and so is Johnny Walker, so I think this is a very intriguing matchup in that I do think that both guys are pretty live for the early finish. I think that Walker still is an explosive enough fighter that, he could potentially get the finish over Cutelaba early. And on a similar note, I do think that Cutelaba can probably do the same, right? I think that, Cutelaba, he could, feint a level change and just throw a big overhand over the top and catch Walker with something. He could potentially take Walker down and throw some nasty ground and pound. I mean, some of the ground and pound and some of the elbows he was throwing against Jacoby in that first round was brutal. And I think if Walker's eating some of the shots, there's a good chance he's getting put out with those, possibly even just a TKO stoppage. But I do think this fight likely ends in the first, but I do think that if this fight somehow goes beyond that 6-minute mark, it could end up going to the decision just because, after that 6-minute mark, I think both guys will start to slow down. I don't think either guy's got particularly great cardio. Cutelaba, he does tend to fall off a bit after that first round because he does push a pretty hard grappling and wrestling pace. And Johnny Walker, in the fights that he has gone to a decision, hasn't looked particularly great either, although he hasn't really gone all that much. But, I'm looking at really the Krylov fight where it was a pretty grapple-heavy fight, and Walker did give up takedowns and a good amount of control time in that fight. And by that third round, he was definitely, very tired in there. He had a little energy going into that, early part of that third round, but Krylov was able to largely grind out that last round because it seemed like Walker was just a bit too tired to work his way back up. That said, Cutelaba isn't exactly a cardio machine in there either. Up against Jacoby, he had a lot of success early. Got a 10-8 round in that fight, but fell off pretty hard in that second and third round. Wasn't really able to hit takedowns much after that. Wasn't able to get off much successful offense, and Jacoby was able to win those latter 2 rounds. And the other thing with Cutelaba is his control actually isn't that great. He's had a number of fights where he's racked up multiple takedowns, 7, 8 takedowns, and still was only able to get about like 4 or 5 minutes of control time over the course of 15 minutes. So while Cutelaba, he is a very explosive and physical wrestler, I don't think he's that good of a grappler. I don't think he's great at controlling opponents, and he's not someone that is looking to hunt submissions in there either. So for Cutelaba to win this fight, I think he's either going to have to get an early finish, which I definitely think he could do, or he's going to have to hit takedowns or enough takedowns in 2 of the 3 rounds to win a decision here, which I think is on the table also. But as far as an official pick, I think I'm actually going to have to go the other way and pick Johnny Walker here. I know Walker's got some potential chin issues, and, Cutelaba could definitely land something big early and put him out. I know Walker, he has been taken down and controlled, but he didn't look completely lost out there. He was actually able to get some reversals on Krylov, and I do think Krylov's a better grappler than Cutelaba. And, Krylov overall is just, I think, a way more well-rounded mixed martial artist. And Walker was actually able to win that second round against Krylov, where he was able to reverse position, get on top, and, throw some ground and pound of his own. But ultimately, it was his cardio that let him down. And, going into this fight, I don't think that Cutelaba is going to have a massive edge there, if any at all. So I do feel that if this fight somehow does get past that first round, it'll become, I think, a pretty 50-50 fight. And, Walker is pretty dangerous himself early. I'm not ruling out an early knockout for Walker either. Walker, he is very dangerous early, and Cutelaba isn't exactly, the most durable guy in there. He has been finished. He has been hurt before, so I think an early finish is live for Walker. I think Walker is capable of winning a decision if it does go there. So I'm going to go with Walker in this fight. I think Cutelaba will probably be able to hit takedowns. I just don't know if he's going to be able to hold Walker down. Walker, he is actually a pretty big light heavyweight, and I feel historically Cutelaba has struggled getting control time over some of these bigger guys. And on the feet, I do favor Walker. I think he's the more dynamic striker. He's going to be the taller, longer guy as well. So I think that if Walker doesn't get clipped bad early, or if he doesn't get hurt bad and knocked out, I think he can make this a very, very interesting fight. So official pick, I'm going to go with Walker. Either round 1 knockout or decision. I think both are on the table, honestly. But yeah, outside of that, I wouldn't go too hard on the over-unders in this fight just because I do think that this fight likely finishes in the first round. I think both guys are very dangerous there, but I think if it somehow gets past that first round, it could get very interesting. It could end up being just a bit of a slop fest, where both guys are kind of tired. They're slowing down. They're not able to get off a ton of effective offense, and it ends up creeping over, right? Similar to the Walker versus Krylov fight, or even the Cutelaba versus Jacoby fight. So while I do favor this fight to end, likely in that first round, I wouldn't be surprised if it crept over. But official pick, I think I'll go with Johnny Walker here. And in the next fight, we have Irene Aldana versus Macy Chiasson, and Aldana's the minus 157 favorite. Chiasson's the plus 137 underdog. And we'll start with the favorite in Aldana first. So with Aldana, she is a pretty good boxer. She's got good volume. She's got good timing and accuracy. But overall, I do actually consider her more of a volume striker than anything. I know she's got a couple of knockouts recently, but I'd say that was more so her just landing a very clean left hook in both instances. And one of them was potentially on a pregnant Kunitskaya. Not sure if that changes anything. But regardless, I do think that Aldana is going to be one of the better strikers in the division. She has shown she could maintain a pretty high output over the course of 3 rounds. And, outside of those, clean left hooks landing, she has largely been a bit of a decisionator. But she's going up against Chiasson, who is, I'd say, a somewhat well-rounded fighter at this point in her career. At least I'd say she's doing a better job of rounding out her game. She came into the UFC as a striker, I'd say. Used to be very aggressive, would look to just swarm opponents and just throw heat. But lately we have seen her go to the grappling a lot more. She's working in the clinch a lot more. She still struggles a bit, off her back and being controlled in the clinch also, but we've seen her look to be a little more offensively minded with it. I don't think she's a phenomenal wrestler or grappler or anything, but I do think that overall it has been beneficial for her. I think a lot of the reason that she's been able to win some of these fights is because she's been able to mix in the wrestling and the grappling and the clinch work. She had success with it against Shanna Young, against Marion Renault, and even Dumont, who, a lot of people had, picked to beat Chiasson. But I'd say the biggest issue with Chiasson is going to be that, well, a couple things actually. She does struggle a bit off of her back. Her own takedown defense is not good. But the cardio, I think, is pretty bad for Chiasson also. She does not look good beyond that 7.5 minute mark. She has been able to fight through the fatigue pretty well, but I think overall it's just not a great look. And, she hasn't really run into someone who's really going to abuse her for that. Aside from Pennington, I guess Pennington was able to really push her pace and eventually get the finish on her. But beyond that, I don't think she's had someone, really, be aggressive against her. But taking a look at this matchup, I do obviously favor Aldana in the stand-up. I think that Aldana is going to be the more technical striker. She's going to be throwing a lot more volume in there. She might even have the quicker hands, but Chiasson, she will be the bigger, the longer fighter, actually. I think that Chiasson does a pretty good job moving laterally and, avoiding strikes, which I think could give Aldana a little trouble. Aldana typically does her best when opponents are kind of just standing in front of her, kind of bum rushing her. Old Chiasson may run into something, but I feel like she's done a much better job of kind of playing on the outside and mixing in the grappling also. So, overall, I do favor the striking of Aldana, but everywhere else, I do actually kind of lean Chiasson. In terms of measurables, Chiasson's going to be the younger fighter. She's going to be taller. She's going to be longer. And overall, I think that she's a little more well-rounded also. On top of that, Chiasson has shown she's improving fight to fight. She's added different wrinkles to her game fight to fight, whereas with Aldana, she's largely just a boxer. She does well with her striking in there, but she has had some close fights herself. But overall, I don't think Aldana's really got much wrestling or grappling upside here, whereas Chiasson does. So, official pick, I think I'm actually going to go with Chiasson by decision. I do think that she can keep it competitive enough on the feet and be able to mix in her grappling to potentially swing rounds that way. So, official pick, I'm going to go with Chiasson by decision. And in the next fight, we have Kevin Holland versus Daniel Rodriguez. And Holland's going to be the minus 200 favorite. Rodriguez is going to be the plus 170 underdog. And this is actually going to be a catchweight fight, I think, at 180. It is a somewhat short notice fight that they put together to, I guess, juice up the card a little bit because it was looking pretty weak up until this point. Still is pretty weak, but definitely a good addition to the card. But we'll take a look at Rodriguez first. So Rodriguez, he is a pretty good boxer, very slick striking. He's got a nice jab, 1-2. He's got pretty good combination punching, also pretty good on the counter. Decent power, but I do consider him more of a volume striker. He's got a number of finishes, but it's mainly over guys who I think might not be the most durable. Guys like Means, who has been cracked before. Grant, who, that was a fight where Rodriguez actually got hurt pretty badly early. It looked like Grant may have unloaded the clip and gassed himself out a bit there, and Rodriguez was able to eventually get the finish. And then the other being against Parsons, who was coming in short notice. Might not be a UFC caliber guy, but Parsons also a grappler as well. So Rodriguez, he was able to get finishers over these guys, but I think against maybe more durable guys who are maybe better strikers, I think the finishers are going to be a little harder to come by. That said, though, I do think D-Rod is a pretty slick boxer, and he is someone who's, I think, pretty dangerous on the feet still. But he's going up against Holland, who is a somewhat well-rounded fighter in that, he could do a bit of everything, but generally he does prefer to strike. He's got a solid kicking game on the feet. He's got a nice low calf kick, a nice oblique kick. He's got a nice jab, 1-2 down the pipe. But like I was saying before, he can wrestle a little bit, and, he is a black belt under Travis Lutter, so, it is something he could potentially go to, but for the most part, he does prefer to keep it standing. And on the feet, Holland does have quite a bit of power, but, I don't think he's the most technical striker in there. He's someone who, can get a little wild in the pocket, will brawl sometimes. And a lot of times I see him kind of just lunging in and just throwing big looping shots. And, he's kind of gotten away with it at 185 against maybe less technical fighters, against fighters that maybe aren't as quick. But at 170, it's kind of hard to say because he has been fighting, some older guys that haven't really been able to punish him too much. So, I don't know if that's part of a game that's been completely shored up just yet, and I feel that if he does that in this matchup, he could be in a little trouble because D-Rod, he is a pretty slick boxer. However, at 35 years old, D-Rod is no spring chicken in there, and he's coming off of a hand injury, a year plus long layoff, so it is a little concerning, and it does kind of seem like the UFC is setting Kevin Holland up here a little bit. I don't think it's an easy matchup whatsoever, but I do think it's a very winnable one for Holland. I think it's going to be a good test to see how Holland, or where Holland really stands in the division, because D-Rod, in my opinion, is a pretty respectable striker, but I feel like they are giving him a slightly neutered version of D-Rod in that, like I was saying before, he is coming off of a longish layoff. He is a little up there in age, and he's got that hand injury he's coming off of as well, so I feel like all the intangibles go towards Holland here. On top of that, Holland is, or not Holland, but D-Rod, he is, he has taken some damage before, right? He historically has been pretty durable, but obviously we saw Grant hurt him pretty badly. Fight probably could have been stopped, under different circumstances. And I'd say even Dalby might have, stung him a bit too, and I don't think Dalby's a particularly hard hitter. Holland, in my opinion, is probably going to be the biggest hitter that D-Rod's fought. But on the feet, I think it should be somewhat competitive. It's kind of hard to say, though, because, while I do think that D-Rod, he might have the quicker hands, he might be the more technical boxer in there. Holland will be the younger guy. He will have the height and the reach advantage. He's going to be much longer in there. He's going to have the kicking advantage also. So on the feet, I think, it could potentially go either way, but I am leaning a little more on the Holland side just because, while I do favor Rodriguez maybe in boxing distance, in the pocket, I think that the fight won't play out there too much. There will be instances where it will, but I feel like at distance, I give Holland the advantage. And on top of that, Holland is actually going to be the slightly more well-rounded fighter. He's got the wrestling a little bit and the grappling. D-Rod, he has hit takedowns before, but, I don't think he's as consistent, or, I don't think either guy's really consistent with the wrestling, but I do think that between the two, Holland's probably got a little more wrestling and grappling upside. But I think the big factors here really is just that where they are at this stage in their career, D-Rod is most likely at the tail end of his prime, if not already past it. And again, he is coming off of a layoff and injury, whereas Holland is, I think, in the prime of his career, and he's actually had more UFC experience. I mean, the guy fought Thiago Santos back in the day, so he's been around in the UFC, and I feel like he's really starting to get into a a rhythm down at 170. So I do think Holland is the side here. And one more thing I wanted to touch on real quick, which, I briefly did earlier, but wasn't able to go really in depth into it. But I feel like between the two, Holland might just be the more durable fighter. I know Rodriguez hasn't been finished before, but he has been hurt pretty badly. He has been dinged, and I feel like the cracks are starting to show a little bit. Whereas with Holland, I think the only time he's been really badly hurt was against Daukaus, where the guy ate a headbutt and was still able to pop back up afterwards. So yeah, I think between the two, Holland's probably got a little more durability, and I do favor the power of Holland a decent bit more. So in a firefight, I do kind of favor Holland to be able to come out ahead more often than not. So I got to go with Holland here. I think he gets it done by round 1 knockout. D-Rod's never been knocked out before, but again, he has been hurt, and I do think that if anyone's going to knock him out at this point, it's going to be Holland. Holland's got pretty crazy power, and it does seem like it's kind of translated at the 170 division here. On top of that, D-Rod, he might be a little rusty coming in. 35 is the age where things start to fall apart a little bit, and coming off that injury and the layoff, I think that the stars might align here for Holland to get the finish. So I'm going to go with Holland. Holland by round 1 knockout. And in the co-main event, we have Li Jingliang versus Tony Ferguson, and Li is the minus 275 favorite. Ferguson is the plus 235 underdog. So pretty random matchup here. Not quite sure how they settled on this matchup, but I guess it's happening. Ferguson's moving up to 170 for this bout, and he's going up against Li, who is a pretty heavy hitter. But we'll start with Ferguson first. So obviously, I think we have a pretty good idea of what Ferguson does. He's a very pressure-heavy fighter, coming off of a pretty heartbreaking performance, if I'm being honest. He looked solid early, but gets it with a Hail Mary front kick to the face. But prior to that, we saw some flashes of just prime Ferguson in there. He was pressuring Chandler early. He was feinting. He was switching stances. He was touching Chandler. He was countering. He was looking to time that elbow also, and even drop Chandler. But a couple, I guess, caveats to that performance. While, I do think that Ferguson looked good, in that first round, there are a few factors to consider. One is that, I do think Chandler's a pretty respectable boxer. The guy's dangerous for sure, but I don't think he's an elite boxer or anything. I think he's very meat and potatoes. He's just got very explosive striking. He does a few things very well in there, and he's able to land big shots. But I don't think he's the most layered guy, and I definitely don't think he's like a very high-level boxer or anything. That said, though, I do still think it was a very solid outing, or very solid showing for Ferguson. But two, let's not forget that Ferguson also just gave up 2.5 minutes of control time in that fight also, right? He did hurt Chandler early. He was looking sharp for the first, 2.5 minutes, but he still got taken down, and he still gave up about 2.5 minutes of control time. Still ended up, finishing the round on his back. So those are aspects of his game that I don't think has really been shored up. So overall, while I do think what Tony did early in the fight was pretty impressive, I don't want to overrate it and forget about his recent skid either, right? So got to keep that in mind. And he's going up against Li Jingliang, who is going to be, I think, a completely different stylistic matchup from Chandler anyways, right? Li, he's a bit more of a counter striker. He's very unorthodox on the feet. Lots of movement, lots of feints. I think Li, he's got pretty good distance management and pretty good precision and timing also. I don't think that Li's got the most power in terms of just, I guess, raw power, but I feel like a lot of his finishes have been from just good timing and precision, being able to land clean on a lot of opponents. So I think that's where most of his knockouts are coming from, not just from brute force or anything. Li, he has struggled with the takedown defense and the get-ups, but I don't think it'll be too big of a factor here. Tony's not someone who's going to look to spam takedowns. He'll look to, go for that ankle pick and stuff sometimes, but not a very grapple-heavy fighter. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's a little tricky because we have Tony moving up. I feel like one of Li's best attributes at 170 is maybe his speed. And, even against a 38-year-old Ferguson, I don't know if he'll necessarily have the speed advantage. Tony, again, he looked sharp, right? He looked really sharp against Chandler. And Tony's actually going to have the reach advantage here, which is pretty insane. I think he's about a couple inches shorter than Lee, but he'll have like a 3 or 4 inch reach advantage over of Lee here. So I think it is a pretty interesting dynamic in that regard. And Lee, in my opinion, is on the smaller end of the welterweight division. I feel like he is a bit more of a tweener, where he might be a little too big for lightweight, but maybe just a tad too small for welterweight, even though he has had success there. That said, I feel like these guys should size up relatively well. Obviously, I think Lee is going to be a lot more filled out for the division, whereas Tony, he is 38 years old, so I doubt he's going to be putting on a ton of muscle mass or anything. But him, at least not having to cut the weight, may be a little beneficial for him in terms of, I guess, the durability and maybe the cardio. I mean, Tony's always had pretty good cardio, but the big concern, obviously, going into this fight is going to be the chin of Tony. He is coming off of a very nasty knockout, one where, he's making a pretty quick turnaround. It's only been about like 4 or 5 months. So I don't know if not having to cut that extra weight is going to be too much of a factor here, because I do think that's a potential life-changing and career-changing knockout. I mean, Tony was out for a good few minutes there in that knockout, and he has taken a lot of damage throughout his career. Tony's been someone that we all kind of know for as being someone who just doesn't stop coming. He's able to take all your damage and eventually break you later in a fight. But that's the sort of stuff that really adds up. I mean, he took a pretty big beating even against Gaethje. So this is just not a great sign for Tony, in my opinion. History has not been kind to guys who are coming off of a nasty knockout, who have taken a career's worth of damage. And again, historically, when these guys who have been really durable most of their career, they get that first knockout, the rest start to come much, much easier. And Tony, he's going to be going up against a pretty heavy hitter in Lee himself. So, I think Tony's going to be in a bit of trouble this fight. I know I've gone pretty narrative heavy, but I do think it's a very legit concern. I think it's, again, a very real possibility that Tony might just not be able to take a punch anymore. And again, Lee can crack for sure. So I think the knockout for Lee is very much on the table here. But setting that aside for just a second here, if by some miracle Tony's chin is still intact, he can still take a punch, he doesn't get knocked out here, it could be a very interesting fight. Tony, again, is going to have the reach advantage. He might still have the speed advantage even. And, he is a very unorthodox fighter, and I feel like if he is able to take the damage, he could make this a very interesting fight, but I don't think he's going to be able to. I think Lee is going to eventually land something and either knock Tony out or at least wobble him bad enough to swing rounds in his favor. But I am leaning on a Lee knockout here. I think he likely gets it done in round two knockout. He's going to need maybe a little time to get his timing in and, make his reads. So I'm going with Lee by round 2 knockout. And something else I quickly wanted to add. I don't know if it's something that will happen in this fight, but I do feel that the wrestling is going to be a potential factor here, more so on the Lee side. Lee, I don't think he's a prolific wrestler or a topside grappler by any means, but he has shown he could hit takedowns before. And against someone like Tony, who is going to be giving up some size in this fight, who is not the best on bottom, if things start to get out of hand, I feel like Lee could just shoot a takedown and, maybe just rack up some control time to be able to win minutes that way. So I'm going to go with Lee in this fight. I'm going to go with Lee by round 1 knockout. And in the main event, we have Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz. And Chimaev's the minus 1,000 favorite. Diaz is the plus 650 underdog. And, not really thrilled about this main event here. I think it's a pretty big mismatch. I don't think the matchmaking's really all that good. And, for those reasons, I think it's going to be kind of hard to break down the stylistics of this matchup here. So it's going to be a bit more of a narrative-driven breakdown. So with that said, let's get right into it. So with Nate, obviously, and the guy's a massive underdog here. So I'll make a bit of a case for him. Obviously, it's MMA, anything could happen. And beyond that, he could just get illegally kneed, eye poked or something, and, maybe an injury happens. But beyond that, I just find it pretty hard to see a very clear path to victory for Nate here. Maybe Khamzat, goes a little too hard early, gasses out and gets finished late, but I really don't think that it's very likely here. I think the line's pretty justified. But taking a look at this matchup, I think a pretty common narrative is we're going to see Chimaev just go in there and absolutely smash Nate, which I think, it was very live. Of course, I think Khamzat is fully capable of doing that. I think he could just go in there and, just take Nate down and absolutely smash him, have his way with him. Khamzat's going to be the much bigger guy, much more physical. He's in his prime, whereas with Nate, obviously the guy's much older, has been a career lightweight also. Occasionally takes fights at welterweight, but, isn't really a natural welterweight. So Nate is for sure going to be giving up size, and if Khamzat wanted to do it, I think he could kind of just ragdoll Nate in there. Nate's also got, a ton of scar tissue. He's going to get busted up pretty quickly here. So, if Khamzat decides to just take him down and smash him, I think he's definitely live to do that. And, he could definitely get a mercy TKO stoppage within the first 2 rounds. But I guess the question is Khamzat going to look to do that? Obviously, I'm not in his corner. I'm not aware of what his game plan is. So you got to take this with a grain of salt. But I'm kind of leaning on this fight kind of going maybe over. I don't know if Khamzat's going to get a decision. I think a late finish is live, but, I don't see Khamzat just going in there and just absolutely mauling Nate. Of course, I think he's fully capable of it, but I do think that this could go over for a couple of reasons, right? The first one, and again, I'm going full narrative city here, so, bear with me here. One, I think that, and this is definitely a bit of a reach, but I think that Khamzat might just show some humanity in this fight, show a bit of mercy in that. I feel sometimes maybe fighters, they'll show a little bit of respect to older guys in the octagon, guys who are, legends of the sport. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking Izzy versus Silva. But, in this matchup, I don't think Khamzat's going to give Nate the John Phillips or the Reese McKee treatment, especially since Nate technically didn't really have to take this fight. And so he's basically giving Khamzat some free exposure. Not that Khamzat needed it, right? The guy's definitely riding a ton of hype. So maybe Khamzat doesn't completely do Nate dirty here. Just doesn't completely maul him, lets the fight play out and breathe a little bit. So that's one reason I feel the fight could go a little longer and maybe hit the overs. Don't really even know what the over is going to set at, but if it's over 1.5, I might honestly play that a little bit. But the more realistic reason I guess this fight could potentially go over is that Nate, he is a dog in there. He is pretty hard to put away. I'd say generally he is kind of tough, and I would consider him more of a cardio fighter. He's got some slick jiu-jitsu, and he does seem to have a little sting in his shots. So if Khamzat just goes super aggro early and isn't able to get Nate out of there, it could get a little hairy for him. And coming off of the Burns fight where, he did kind of taper off in that second round, going a little too hard in the first, I can see Khamzat maybe looking to be a little more reserved going into this fight. So just for general pacing concerns, I could see Khamzat maybe not going as hard early. And the other reason I think this could potentially just go longer is that this is just, I think, a good opportunity for Khamzat to really get some 5-round experience, getting into the later rounds without facing someone who's just a massive threat, right? Because let's be real here. I think Nate is a solid fighter, but I don't think he's particularly dangerous on the feet. And I just don't really see him catching Khamzat in a sub or something unless Khamzat's just completely dead tired or something. So overall, I feel this is a pretty solid opportunity for Khamzat to get some reps in, really work on his striking against a somewhat harmless opponent. Not to not to be disrespectful to Nate, but I just think that this is going to be good for Khamzat to kind of work on the rest of his skill set a little bit and really just get that 5 rounds in. And so for those reasons, I think this fight will probably creep to the over. I'm kind of leaning Khamzat decision actually. I think it could be somewhat similar to the Leon Edwards fight where, he might just be kind of coasting in there. Maybe not coasting, but I feel like if at any point he starts to feel the fight is maybe out of his reach, he'll sit down on a few heavy shots. Maybe he'll just, shoot a takedown and kind of close out the round with some control time or something. But regardless, I do see Khamzat being largely in control for most of the fight. I think if he wants to keep it striking, he can. If he wants to take Nate down, he can. I think he can likely get it done however he wants. But as far as an official pick, I think I'm going to go with Khamzat by decision. I'm going to go maybe a little contrarian here. Again, wouldn't be surprised if Khamzat just went in there and took Nate's head off early, but I see Khamzat maybe kind of toying with him a little bit and looking to just win a pretty sound decision here. So I'm going to go with Khamzat by decision. I know not the most technical breakdown here, but again, I do feel this is a bit of a mismatch. I don't see too many path for Nate here, so I got to go with the obvious pick in Khamzat, and I'll take him to win by decision. And that'll do it for the breakdowns, which will take us right into the recap for the previous event. Pretty solid betting night for me. Pretty solid on the picks, too. I think one of my better events in terms of the Tapology scoring and stuff ended up going, I think, 10 for 12 officially. So, yeah, let's get right into the recap. So, kicking off the card, we had Stephanie Egger versus Eileen Perez. I did end up taking a small 1-unit bet on Perez. Really just to play on the numbers. I did think that Egger should be the favorite. Didn't think she should be that big of a favorite. At the end of the day, it is pretty low-level women's MMA, but in hindsight, probably should have just passed because Perez is primarily a grappler, and Egger is a really good grappler herself, a much more proven grappler, and she ended up just winning all of the grappling exchanges. Definitely probably should have just passed. So we move along. Khalid Taha, Kristen Quinones, a fight that got put together pretty short notice. Quinones, while he was coming in on short notice, was actually preparing for a fight. He was actually scheduled to fight Zalal a couple weeks ago. So, it's not like he's just rolling off the couch. And honestly, I was going to bet Quinones against Zalal. But, we had another opportunity here. What it came down to was I just felt that Quinones, much taller, longer guy, much better movement on the feet. I figured he'd be able to get the better of Taha in the striking exchanges, avoid the big power shots, and win a decision here. But I did end up hedging a little bit with Taha by knockout because I did feel that Taha, he does have power. Quinones, he has been finished. He has been knocked down. He has been hurt on the regionals also. So just hedged it a little bit there. Obviously didn't really need to as Quinones was able to get the knockout, but overall still came out ahead on that one. And then moving along, we had Benoit Saint Denis versus Gabriel Miranda. Goddamn. Gabriel Miranda. And I bet Denis straight. I just thought he'd be able to just completely outpace Miranda here. Took a small poke on Miranda to win by round 1 submission because I do feel that would have been his most likely path to victory. Was pretty long odds too, so it would have been able to cover most of my losses had he have pulled it off. But Denis was able to pretty much just smoke him on the feet, knocked him down a number of times, and I don't think it was ever really even close. I also took the under in this fight. I don't remember what my official pick was. I was on the Denis side, but I don't know if I took him to win by decision or to win in round 2 or 3 or something, but I just felt that finish was pretty live on both sides. Denis does push a pretty crazy pace. I felt that if Miranda didn't get the early sub, I thought Denis would have been able to just completely smother him and just outpace him later in the fight. So that was able to cash. But moving along, Faris Ziem versus Mikhail Figlak. I was on the Figlak side. I thought he'd be able to work in the takedowns and be able to have a little more success with the striking, but it looked like Ziem was able to get his wrestling game going. I guess he had enough of guys taking him down and decided to just kind of flip the script there a little bit. I was pretty interested in Figlak by decision. I was debating about playing that or just looking to parlay Figlak with another big favorite that I thought was, pretty likely to win. Ended up just not playing the decision and just parlaying him instead. The odds came out pretty similar. I think Figlak decision was like minus 120, but if I parlayed him, I would have gotten like plus 108. And so I ended up taking those odds instead. Probably shouldn't have just bet him at all, right? I did have my reservations about a guy making his UFC debut. He didn't look terrible, but Ziem was able to get the better of him. Not a good play there. But moving along, John McDessie, Nazareth Haqparast. I think I ended up parlaying Haqparast. He didn't look great, but he did come away with the decision. Started off a little slow, but was able to kind of ease his way into it. Was able to eventually find the mark on McDessie. And, part of the fate on McDessie here was I just felt it was going to be a striking affair. Him coming off of the layoff with the injuries. I just felt that Haqparast would be able to likely just touch him up and get the better of him in the exchanges. And that's kind of what he did there. Can't say it was a great bet either, all things considered, but was fortunate to come away with one. And so we move along into the next fight, Abus Magomedov versus Dustin Stoltzfus. So I was on the Magomedov side, parlayed him. Also took a small poke on Magomedov to win by round 1 knockout. I felt that for this fight, Stoltzfus's win condition would have been just with the grappling and the wrestling, but I felt there was just such a big gap on the feet between the two that I thought Magomedov would be pretty live for the knockout before Dustin would really even be able to get his wrestling going. And even then, it would have been a bit of a reach, right? I wasn't a guarantee or anything that Stoltzfus would have a ton of success with it, just because we haven't seen too much from the bottom game and the takedown defense from Magomedov. And Magomedov is a decent wrestler himself, so the more I thought about it, the more I liked the Magomedov side. And he ended up getting it done with relative ease. I knew it was a wrap when he landed that first up kick. The first kick he threw, he landed flush on the chin of Stoltzfus, was able to follow up and eventually get him out of there. Very easy cash there. Very happy about that. Moving along, Charles Jourdain versus Nathaniel Wood. So I did end up putting a small play on Jourdain just because I thought that it would really just come down to the power between the two. I thought Jourdain would be able to land the heavier shots, and I thought that maybe the judges would score that a little better, but it didn't really matter at the end of the day. And I felt like what it really came down to was the takedowns of Wood, but not even, right? A lot of the times it was just Jourdain throwing really big, sloppy strikes, slipping, and Wood kind of just taking advantage and getting on top of him. And I feel like that was what really kind of swung the fight. But yeah, I think I might have to stay off of Jourdain at chalk, because regardless of whether he's a big underdog or a big favorite, the guy's going to fight close. And for those reasons, I think I might have to lay off the chalk unless it's a very, very favorable matchup. But yeah, Jourdain, I think, is a better dog play than he is a chalk play. But moving along, William Gomez versus Jarno Aarons. Not a fight I did too much tape on. I ended up putting Gomez in a long shot parlay, but yeah, I just felt he'd get it done with the grappling, and that's kind of what happened there. Not much else to say there. Pretty boring fight, if I'm being honest. Probably shouldn't have been on the main card. Should have been like a second or third card on the prelim, or second or third fight on the prelims. But we move along. Alessio Di Chirico versus Roman Kopylov. A fight I ended up just passing on. I was on the Kopylov side, but wasn't super confident, and it was fortunate for him to get that late knockout, but it did look like Di Chirico was starting to come on a little bit. So, I don't think either side was particularly value, if I'm being honest. But yeah, Kopylov did look like he's got some pretty quick hands in there, was able to put some combinations together. Those kicks were quick too, and I think that ended up being the difference maker here. Started off pretty good. Di Chirico came back a little bit and then was able to get the early knockout. Decent win for Kopylov, but still have concerns about his defensive grappling. But moving along, Nasruddin Imavov, Joaquin Buckley. I did end up betting Imavov here. Took a small play on Imavov by submission also. I thought that Imavov would be just the cleaner striker in there, a little more technical, a little sharper. And that was the case, I'd say, early. Showed a bit of grappling also. Came kind of close to maybe getting the rear naked choke there. Not really sure, but I was kind of banking on either that happening or, maybe him hurting Buckley and Buckley diving into a guillotine or a Darce or something. Imavov does have a pretty sneaky front choke series, so took a small shot there. Obviously didn't cash, but it did come close enough that I felt like it might have been value. Regardless, was able to come away with the win there. Buckley was coming on strong in the third. Did clip Imavov a few times, but Imavov seems to have a pretty decent chin and was able to survive and win a decision. 30-27 though was a little egregious on the Imavov side. 29-28 was pretty clear here. So we move along. Robert Whittaker, Marvin Vettori had the over in this fight anchored in a couple parlays. Also took Whittaker to win by decision, and it was just an absolute masterclass by Whittaker there. That first round was pretty dicey, and I was a little hesitant about this fight because I thought what happened in that first round could potentially play out for 3 rounds, and it ended up being a very contested fight, but Whittaker was able to pull away in that second and third rounds very clearly. But again, that first round did actually seem pretty close. I was a little surprised to see the live odds where they were. But I don't know. I might have missed a few things. Regardless, Whittaker was able to win that pretty handily, pretty dominantly. Just a very solid performance by Whittaker. And then lastly, we had the main event between Cyril Gane and Tai Tuivasa, and definitely a much more exciting main event than I had anticipated it to be. Had a few bets on this fight. I had the over 1.5 parlayed. I played the over 2.5, and then I also took some small pokes on Gane to win in round 3, 4, and 5. The over 2.5 was very intriguing to me. I thought that Gan would kind of just play it safe. I didn't think he'd really start to pour it on until the latter part of the fight, so I really didn't think he'd be able to finish Tai in the first 2 rounds, and I figured Tai would likely survive the first 2.5 minutes of the third, given the minute break between the rounds. So I ended up playing that, but also played Gan to win in round 3, just in case Tai really did start to slow down in that third round, but also would have been able to double dip a little bit had Gan got the late round 3 finish, which he did. Really fortunate there, but pretty crazy fight. I don't think the 2.5 was actually that good of a play, seeing as how Tai had gotten the knockdown on Gan, and Gan admitted to have been knocked out that fight, was able to kind of come to, I guess, right away and still pour it on. So pretty impressive performance by both guys, I'd say. Gan showed pretty damn good durability and recoverability, which we hadn't really seen before. Definitely answered some questions there, and I really did like to see Gan kind of pick it up when he did get hurt, right? But I also thought he had some really good game planning in this fight. I really liked the body shots he was going to, or the body kicks. I really like how he invested to it. He was fighting primarily out of southpaw for a good chunk of that fight, just targeting the body, and I thought that ended up paying dividends there. I've always kind of said that at heavyweight, I think it's a very underutilized tool. Well, I feel it's a very underutilized tool in general, but especially at heavyweight, where you have these big tubby guys with big bellies that you could target. These guys who have subpar cardio also, and he was able to fully utilize that in this fight, and it definitely ended up paying off. So good on Gan there, solid win. But I think the big takeaway here is just seeing Gan take a big punch and being able to recover from that, I think, is a solid takeaway here. Gan definitely seems to have a chin on him and good recoverability too. So I think the heavyweight division is in a good place. Gan's definitely going to be a force to reckon with going forward. But one thing I did want to quickly mention, I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but it kind of looked like Gan may have landed an illegal strike to the back of the head against Tuivasa, dropped a hammer fist on him in the back of the head. I'm not sure if anyone else noticed that. I'm not sure if it would have mattered too much, honestly. I think Tuivasa was pretty gassed out. He was probably on his way out. If not this round, probably the round after that. But yeah, just a little thing I noticed there. Anyways, that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Had a nice little break. Kind of glad to be back in action now. Best of luck with your guys' bets, and I'll catch you next week.